What's going on, Imperials? It's Emperor Cubone here. Pokémon evolution is part of what makes these creatures so memorable. However, not every evolution makes the most sense, sometimes leaving a huge gap in between stages. So today I wanted to highlight a trend that perhaps you all have seen of in-progress evolutions. This inserts forms of Pokémon halfway between their evolutionary stages. I just want to say that I did not make these. There's a whole website devoted to the artists that produce these imaginative images, so be sure to check that out if this piques your interest. I'm also really not that engrossed in a lot of fan-made games, since I feel that most of them don't usually have a certain undefinable spark that makes Pokémon designs unique. But if your parameters are two existing Pokémon, then it's a lot easier to get right. So I'll look through just some of these in-progress Pokémon evolutions and show off the ones that I think work best. To me, the transition works most believably when it's not too heavily leaning to one side and favoring a single design over the others, and the other major area of consideration for me is the name that they choose to give these creations. So for instance, we all know the Generation 1 line Abra, Kadabra, and Alakazam, and here is what they have decided the in-progress stages should look like. Now to me, they do probably both lean a little too much towards Kadabra. I mean, that is the middle, so I get it, but their names are Hocus and Pocus, which is just chef's kiss perfect. They nailed the spirit of these Pokémon. Whereas I would say the opposite is the case of the Squirtle line, where they made Spratle, which could be a better name, Terrapond, which is okay considering, but their designs are pretty great in my opinion. The common sites of the Surf, Tentacool, and Tentacruel have been given the in-progress stage of Tentacle, which sounds pretty ominous, and I think the design is a good bridge that could also stand on its own. Of course, then there's also the Ekans line, which gives us Repiv, that has to stick with the backwards naming convention, so that's pretty good. The Magnemite line is predictably given Magnemate, which is just 2 of them before the 3 that we see in Magneton, even if it does melt together in MAGNEMELD before we get to Magnezone. Now, I've never been blown away by the Goldeen line, but this fish in between does do them both justice, I think. However, the best part is the name Coilty. That is a brilliant way to connect both of their regal names. And we see a similar thing with the Krabby line, where its physical appearance is what you might expect, but the name Princer being a perfect lead-in for the final stage. But it's not only reserved for Generation 1, since their efforts have gone across all of the Pokémon roster, like Bronzor shifting into Bronzel, which I think does convincingly show how Bronzong grew out of a single coin/gear thing. There's also the Lotad line, and I'm not really crazy about the first one, but I want to focus on the stage between Lombre and Ludicolo, because this shows how a little duck thing filled out to be the final stage that we see. But even better is the name, Pinecapple. Not only does this acknowledge the fact that it's clearly a pineapple for some reason, but it also incorporates the Kappa inspirations that it draws out of Japanese lore, so well done. Another that I think is a good transition is after Mudbray, we see a horse that's bigger and capable, but not quite the monster size in the final form. But maybe the best part is its name being Mudstang, which only furthers the idea that it would be more speed-focused, as opposed to the more powerful Clydesdale at the end. Now, most of the regional bugs have a similar setup, since they realistically just have the insects break out of their cocoons, but that doesn't leave much to the imagination. However, I think the Grubbin line is probably done best. First by adding a nice in-between to Chargebug and calling it Ampupa, so I'm assuming that it gained the electric type here already. But it gets even better with Moltage, a perfect name combination to display its typing and action. And here the Vikavolt itself is still in progress, which is what puts it over the other bugs to me, because that was the promise after all. But in that vein, we also see the Frostmoth line has added a cocoon middle stage, this time encasing itself in pure ice, being called Ice-Cocoon. The Galar region also gave us an in-progress stage for the Corsola variant, where you can actually see the spirit rising from the former husk, and they gave it the name Corpsula. I didn't think that this could get any more morbid, but hats off to you for finding a way. One that I think might be underrated belongs to the Spinarak line. It's not overly flashy, but to me the features are a smooth transition from the more friendly to the more sinister, and the colors are just great. Also, Arachnite is a great play on the web-weaving characteristics. It seems that Johto in general has a lot of great names for the alright designs, like this in-progress stage called Trouble, which is just perfect. There's also Ursa Minor that isn't really that hard to figure out, but I do love me a good constellation. I am, however, a fan of the Pineco middle stage. The design finally lets me see how this thing turned into Fortress, but the name CONIFORT is a wonderful portmanteau that lends to both the nature and the fortification of this defensive bug. However, we also see some confusing names that stem from the Meryl line. As we know, this Aquamouse evolves into Azumarill, and later they added the baby form Azurill. But with these progressions, we now have Azurill, Meryl, Zumarill, and Azumarill. Got it? But another name that I do love is Fantalabra, in between Lampent and Chandelure. The design is meh, but I feel the opposite on the other end of this line, with Waxelt as a weak name, but the design choice of putting the candle on one of those old-timey holders was a genius way to reach the antiquated street lamps. But while we're in Unova, let's just breeze through a few, like the pretty good in-progress stage of the Braviary line. Couragic I don't find to be a great name, but it does look believably to be connected to both. The LGM design is pretty good as in progression, but the name UFO is perfectly on brand as well. There's also Craggle as an in-between. I was pretty sure that was a form from the Lego movie, but still. I also appreciate the names of the Timberline progressions of Logger going into Girder, and then Mixer stirring up the columns that it will use in the final stage. And I just wanted to point out the specific case of Cofagrigus, because back before Gen 5, I made up a Pokemon that would be a Ghost-type Sarcophagus, and then they stole it from me. But in my version, it would evolve from a Canopic Jar, which was also used for burial purposes. So the fact that this person saw fit to insert it here as well was quite vindicating. Even though I still think mine probably would have been better. I mean, they both would have been ground types and they would have evolved from a Scarab at the beginning. It was really cool, trust me. One of my favorite designs is probably from the Avalugg line. There is so much space in going from the tiny Bergmite to the titanic Avalugg that they had a lot to play with. And I think that they did a pretty good job in imagining how this thing might basically be inverted. I will say I'm not even sure what the name is supposed to mean, but that is more than made up for by the awesome detail of having its icy bones being visible through its translucent legs. But there are several more in-progress Pokemon that I think are better served by their names alone, like Escargoo, found in the Gumi line. There's also a somewhat awkward bird placed between Swablu and Altaria, but its name is CIRRENATA, which is a lovely cross between a type of cloud and song to fit him beautifully with the others. The most recent Grass starter line also received a progression stage called Gorhythm, which is pretty great, and I think better than the actual final name of Rillaboom, only slightly below the name Concussion that I created. Now for my favorite fossils in the Tyrant line, they did a pretty great job. I can see it as a respectable version of a teenage T-Rex of sorts. Maybe it leans a little too much to the Tyrantrum side, but that's okay, especially since the name is Tyrampant, so it fits in pretty well if you ask me. But of course, before we go, we have to check in on the Cubone line, and this is honestly probably one of the best forms that these people have created. You can really see how the rougher edges grew to become more streamlined. And the name they chose to give it, Femurek, works pretty well too, sticking with the overall bone theme, and I'm assuming that Rek refers to what it will do with its skeletal club, much like the whack of the final stage. However, that's not all, because Cubone also had a regional evolution, so Femurek gets a fiery makeover as well. I'm gonna say that it's probably ground and fire at this point, and then will gain the ghost form in its final stage. All in all, it's pretty fascinating to look at these in-between iterations of Pokémon, even if they aren't officially sanctioned. But hey, maybe if they run out of gimmicks, we might see them introduced one day, like some of the old scratched baby forms. What do you think of these in-progress Pokémon, and what are your favorite Pokémon fan projects? Let me know down in the comments. Also be sure to leave a like, share this video, and subscribe so that you too can become an Imperial today. And we'll see you around next time!